First tonight, a shocking twist in the 2024 death of crime boss Mike Miske. Prosecutors now believe he purposely took his life behind bars.
A move to keep his dirty money from being seized. Our A'ali'i Duklo explains the government's claims.
The federal government says Miske had a financial motive to take his life after getting advice from his attorney.
We haven't seen anything like this where it was a schemed out, planned event.
Retired federal public defender Alexander Silvert is among those eager to see the evidence that could cost the late crime boss his $20 million estate.
The civil forfeiture action is going to be further delayed because now there are these new allegations that have to be investigated.
Those new allegations by the U.S. Attorney's Office portray Miske as the plotter of his 2024 suicide, to appear as an accidental overdose, to end the court case and ensure his family keeps his unlawfully gained assets. Those include his homes in Portlock and Kailua, a Ferrari, several Volkswagens, a Boston Whaler, and artwork.
The government's theory that Mr. Miske committed suicide to avoid asset forfeiture at the advice of his attorney is entirely possible, but it begs the question on how the government would know that, given the nature of privileged conversations between attorneys and clients.
How prosecutors figured this out is unclear, but they claim Miske smuggled fentanyl into the federal detention center, then took small doses over several days, knowing that would make his overdose look like an accident. To get the drugs, Miske allegedly bribed another inmate who was out on supervised release, gifting him a vehicle to violate his release conditions. The feds say that inmate purposely got rearrested to deliver the fentanyl to Miske. Silvert says this likely involved other co-conspirators.
I do think there was probably some sort of deals made by these individuals who gave admissions as being part of this. We'll see as time rolls out what those deals were.
Miske was 50 years old when he died, awaiting sentencing after being found guilty of 13 counts, including murder. If prosecutors are right, his final crime was staging his own death, raising yet another question. Exactly what did his attorney know?
It is perfectly legal for a lawyer to answer questions of their client as to different results that could happen under the law. And my understanding is that's exactly what happened here. And then Mr. Miske, on his own, devised this scheme.
We reached out to Miske's attorney for comment, and we're waiting to hear back. A'ali'i Duklo, Hawaii News Now.